Hi, and welcome to this PowerShell Universal project series. This series, we're going to be focusing on creating a cool little help desk application that's going to let users search for users in Active Directory. They're going to be able to see some of the information from Active Directory, whether the account is locked out, enabled, or disabled, and also see their group membership and be able to reset their password. Now, this is going to be a multi-part series where we're going to be using all the things that we've learned in the PowerShell Universal series that we've just finished, and we're going to be incorporating those. So this video is going to really be focusing on creating those API endpoints that we need for our application. Now, we are using API endpoints in our application. Doesn't mean that they're actually fully needed. We could, in fact, make this whole application in the user interfaces and just add a lot more code into our user interfaces, buttons, and the on-click actions. But the reason why we're creating API endpoints is the fact that it's going to be a bit more flexible in if we're actually going to be creating more user interfaces in PowerShell Universal. Maybe we want to reuse some of those API endpoints because they can be useful in other applications. But also, maybe eventually we're going to be only using PowerShell Universal as more of a backend, and maybe we're going to be building a front end with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And in that case, we can just call the API endpoints to get that same data, but we can make a different user interface and a different login method for our front end. So it's just the ability to really be able to reuse that code a lot more often, or maybe you want to create a PowerShell module and give it to your users, and they could simply, you can create commandlets that will just execute against the API endpoint, and you can do it that way as well, so they don't have to use the Active Directory PowerShell module. These are all different abilities that come with the API endpoints versus just coding it in the user interfaces. So without further ado, this is going to be a multi-part series. And this video might be a little bit on the longer side because we need to create quite a few routes. So let's go ahead and let's actually get started here. So basically what we're going to just do here is let's go to our Visual Studio screen here. Because what I like to do is I like to just build out what we're going to need in Visual Studio. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to move to actually building those API endpoints in PowerShell Universal. Let's go ahead, let's just shrink this a little bit and shrink this a little bit. So you guys should be able to see the code nice and clearly. So what we really need is, based on our description of the application, is we're going to need a route that's going to be able to get a user. We want to be able to get the user's groups. So get user group membership. And then we're also going to want to reset the password potentially as well. We also said that we might be unlocking the account. And we also said that we're going to be enabling or disabling the account. Let's do enable/disable account. We're going to do these in two separate things, but we're going to put them on one line item. So these are really the line items that we need to tackle for the API endpoint. So let's go ahead and let's start with just the get user command here that we're going to want to get for our API endpoint. So what I really like to do is I like to do everything in Visual Studio Code before I do it in PowerShell Universal, just to make sure that my code actually works. And there's a little bit of better IntelliSense on Visual Studio Code. There is IntelliSense on PowerShell Universal, as we've seen, but this just makes it a little bit more straightforward and a little bit more familiar for people. So what we're going to first want to do is really get our user. So we're going to create a variable called user. We're going to make that equal to get AD user. And then we're going to do an identity. Now here, since we are wanting to pass in a user, we're going to do a $username here. We're just going to create a $username equals a pair of empty brackets or empty pair of double quotes here. And let's go ahead and let's get all the properties back. And let's supply the server here, which for us is jacked.ca. And let's go ahead and let's get our test employee 3 here and let's see what we get back. All right, so we have our user object coming back. We can see all the different properties. I can go ahead and expand that there so you guys can see all the different properties that actually come back. So now we need to determine really what we want to display to our end user in our application. That's going to be really, really helpful for them. And what I want to do is I want to create a result. Since we're creating an API endpoint, we know that an API usually, not all the time, but usually gives back a response. And we want that response to be a fairly good response. And in this case, we want our response to actually be our user object. So what we're going to do is PS custom object here. And let's go ahead and let's create our object that we want here. So we definitely want the user's name. So we're going to do user.name. And erase this bracket here. The other thing that we might want to do is grab the username. Now, I actually reference it as username in here. In Active Directory, it's going to be SAM account name, but maybe the users that we're targeting this application to might not necessarily know what a SAM account name is. So that's why we want to call it a username. And then we're going to say a user principal name. Now, this might be another one where you might want to change this to email. A lot of users might understand email more. It really depends on the clientele that you're aiming this application to be for. So we're going to make that equal to user.user principal name. And let's go ahead and let's do employee ID because we want to get that back. So that's going to be user.employee ID. And let's do title as well so we can see what kind of job they have. And that's going to be user.title. And then, of course, if we want to be able to enable, disable, unlock the account, and reset the password, we're definitely going to want the enabled field here. Enabled is going to be equal to user.enabled. And then we're going to do password expired. And we're going to make that equal to user.password expired locked out. So whether the account is locked out or not, we're going to say user.locked out. And then we want to grab the last bad password attempt. And that we're going to make that equal to user.last bad password attempt. Now we have everything that we need. And let's go ahead and let's look at what our result looks like here. So it's result, it's singular. Let's go ahead and let's launch this code here. And there we have it. So we have our employee ID, which in this case is null, and we have title, which is null. So what we can actually go ahead and do just to make sure that we actually have data in there. Let's open up our Active Directory. Let's open this up real quick. Let's give this person a job title of programmer. And let's hit apply here. And I don't have the additional info, so let me just go ahead and add the additional features here. And let's go into attribute editor and let's find the employee ID. And let's go ahead and let's set that to 0012. All right, hit apply and let's close out of it and let's rerun it. Now we have our employee ID and we have our title. So we know that everything is working here. So now what we can go ahead and do is we can go ahead and create our API route for this get user here. So let's go ahead and let's go back into our PowerShell Universal window here. And we are going to create a new endpoint. Now our URL is going to be get user. And here's where it gets a little bit tricky. So we're going to be doing it all through query strings. Now you can do it through with body, passing a body, but we're going to be doing all of these through query strings. Makes it a little bit easier, especially since all of our API endpoints, we are just going to be passing in a single value, which is going to be username. Just makes it a little bit simpler. So let's put in username here. And our method is going to still be a get because we're just getting information here. So let's go ahead and let's click on OK. And we should see it pop up very soon. Let me just actually refresh here. Oh, it probably need to recreate it because it looked like I got timed out here. So let's create our endpoint. Let's do the get user / username, and the method is get. Let's click on OK. And there is our endpoint right here. So we can see our endpoint. Now let's go ahead and let's just edit the properties of this endpoint. And I want to remove the authentication in my case, and I want to make the default environment, let's make it 7.4.1. And let's go ahead and let's click on OK. And that should be working just fine. Let's go ahead and let's edit the details now. So now we're going to be provided a spot where we can put in our code. And let's go ahead. And as you can see here with the username, that makes it so that we could pass in our query string, which is going to be username. And the awesome thing is that is referenced just with $username. So any parameter that you pass through a query string is just the $, anything that you put in after the colon. So let's go ahead and let's copy paste that code in here. Then the only thing that we need to add in front of the result is just return result. And let's hit save. And then the nice thing is we can actually go ahead and test our route here. So let's go ahead and let's put in test employee 3. And let's hit run. And there we go. We get our data back. So if we actually just scroll through here, we're able to see all of our information come back perfectly fine. We see all of our data here. So that is great. All right, so let's go ahead and let's hit save one last time just to be sure. And let's go ahead and let's go back. And let's go and move on to our next endpoint, which is going to be the user groups here. So what I'm going to do, since I already know the code for these, I don't really necessarily need them to do them in Visual Studio Code. We're going to go ahead and we're just going to go ahead and create a new endpoint here. And we're going to make our URL get user groups. And we're going to do a / username again. Once again, this is just going to be a get because we're simply getting the different user groups. And let's go ahead and let's make the exact same thing here. So remove the authentication. Let's put our environment to 7.4.1. Now you can leave this at default as well. That will work just fine. And let's click on OK. And let's go ahead and let's edit our script here. So let's go ahead, just make this a little bit bigger for you guys. And let's just zoom in and let's work on this code. So what we want to do here is we want to get back all of the different groups that we belong to. So what I want to do is I want to start off by initializing our result variable, which is what we're going to be giving back to the user. And we're going to want to create that as an empty array here. So we're just going to do $result equals an empty array. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a groups equals get -ad principal group membership identity username. And then the server, once again, for us is just going to be jacked.ca. Now, the main reason why you might be wondering, well, why can't we just pass back the group's object? Oftentimes, PowerShell Universal will not actually like passing back those objects because they are too big or they are just not a really good type to be opened back up with JSON. You're going to encounter a lot of issues. That's what happened to me when I was trying to get back a list of users. It would work if I had a very limited subset of properties, but as soon as I was pulling back too many users or too many properties, PowerShell Universal was just not really having it. So I really like to kind of customize what I send back to the user as well. I don't necessarily want everything of what the Active Directory commandlets give back. So we want to give a very, very specific subset, and we can keep that to exactly what we want to display to our users. We want to give them just enough and not too much to where they don't really need all that extra information, and that might just confuse them. So you just give them just enough to where they can actually function, and that's usually the best way to go about it. So what we want to do now is we want to do a for each group in group. So we want to loop through all of our groups here, and then we're going to do a pair of curly brackets. And let's go ahead and let's get the group details now. So we're going to do a group details equals get AD group. And see, now we can get a lot more information on the group. So we're going to be getting the AD group, and we're going to be getting all the properties for this group. We want to just specify the server again, which is jacked.ca. And then what we want to do is we want to create an object again. So we're going to create an object called entry, and we're going to make that equal to a PS custom object. And let's go ahead and put name is going to be equal to group.name. And then we're going to want a group category. So that will tell us if the group is either a distribution list or a security group. And then we want group category. And let's do a group scope. This will tell us what the scope is for Active Directory on that group. So that is going to be actually in group details dot group scope. And then we want the description. So this is going to be the description that we have set in Active Directory. So we're going to want to get that from group details dot description. Then all we're going to do after we create the entry object is we're going to add it to our result array. And then all we want to do after that, let me just go back here. All we want to do after that is return the result here. So return results, and we can hit save. Let's shrink this down, and we can go ahead once again, test with our test employee 3. Hit run here, and we can actually see that it's part of domain users, which is a group category 1. So that's a little odd. We might have to change that. We have group scope 1 and description all domain users. We have domain admins, group category is 1. So a really good way around that, actually, to avoid the ones there, what we actually want to add is a .toString after the group category and after the group scope. So if we do toString and then toString here, let's hit save, minimize that, and let's just rerun that, and we got an error here. So this is where running it in Visual Studio Code can definitely come in handy. So let's go ahead and let's see why we have the problems here. Let's go into our Visual Studio. Let's put it in here. And let's run this code here. Let me just run this up. And if we hit run, everything here looks good to me. So let's go ahead and let's see why that might not be working. Let's hit save real quick. And still nothing. Let's just make sure that everything looks to be good. I mean, we copy pasted it in Visual Studio Code and it was working just fine. What we might also want to do is what I often do is I'll just go back into the properties, change it to default here. Let's go back and let's run it again against test employee 3. There we have it. So that is now working now, and we can see that the group scope is now global. So these are all things that you might want to take into account when you are manipulating some of your different routes. And let's just go ahead and let's just change the environment back to 7.4.1. And let's just see if we get the same error that we were getting earlier now. And we aren't. So sometimes you'll have some weird issues with the preview of the code running. If you copy it into Visual Studio Code, see that you're not having any issues, just exit out of the API endpoint, maybe change the environment, or just go back into it and rerun it and see if that really helps. I usually find that that usually solves the majority of the issues. And we can now see that group category shows security, group scope shows global, so we can actually read them. They're not just one, which will make a lot more sense to our end users. Let's go ahead and let's just go back here. So we have a few more routes to create. What we're going to do is I'm actually going to create one more route in this video, and we're going to call it there for this video. And we're going to do the other 3 routes in the next video. And I'm going to tell you guys what the routes are. You guys kind of already know what the routes are, and see if you guys can figure them out by the next video. And if not, I will be walking you guys through creating those routes. So let's go ahead and let's create the reset password route here, which is going to be our first route where it is not a get. So we're going to do reset password / username. And we're actually going to make this as a patch. Now, I would put it as a patch or a put or a post. That would usually be probably my method here. We can even go look at what they usually are here. So we can actually say HTTP methods in REST API. They might have some definitions on what would just make more sense. So get, we know. So post is usually sent from forms when you're posting or saving data or calculate a result. So put is to completely replace a resource. And then patch is going to be significantly, so it's send a small payload rather than a complete resource representation to the server. So since we're only resetting the password, this is where I would use patch, because we aren't really modifying a whole user. We're just resetting and changing a really small portion of the user. So that's where I would use patch here. And let's click on OK. And let's go into the reset password. Let's go edit properties, remove that authentication, put to 7.4.1. And let's go ahead and let's actually just do the entire thing in Visual Studio Code first. And then we'll go into PowerShell Universal, just because it was a little weird last time. So we're going to make sure that it actually fully works first and then go from there. So what we want to actually do when we're resetting a password for a user through an interface, what I actually like to do is I like to get the user's password policy first. So we're going to know exactly how long the password needs to be so we can actually set it to that and give it the best possible chance of being a password that is going to match the password policy. So what I want to do is I want to create a variable here called password policy, and we're going to make that equal to get AD user resultant password policy, and then identity is going to be username. All right. And if we go ahead and we actually run this, we're going to see that our password policy, we actually get it, and we see that the minimum password length is 12. So we can see that we do have a password policy applied on test employee 3, which is perfect. Now what we need to do is we need to create our character set that we're going to want to use to reset that user's password. So what I like to do is I like to create a couple arrays, a total of 4 arrays of different character sets. So what we're going to create is our first one, which is going to be our uppercase set. And we're going to make that equal to an array of numbers 65 through 90. And we're going to pipe that to a for each. And we're going to do a curly bracket and then a square bracket with char for character and then $_ here. So what this actually does, if I just run this little bit of code, what you're going to see is if we go up here, it generates me a list of all the letters A through Z uppercase. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to actually copy paste this line multiple times. We're going to change it now to lowercase set, and then I name one numeric, and then I also get a special set here. So the lowercase is going to be 97 through to 122. The numeric set is going to be 48 through 57. And then the special set that we want, I actually make a custom special set just because I just want the exact ones that are very easy for users to put in, like %, exclamation mark, the @ symbol. I try to avoid ones that are a little bit more complicated. So that's 33, 35, 36, 37, 38, 42, and 63. And you can simply go ahead and check out what it is. So right now what we have is the exclamation mark, $, $, %, ampersand, star, and question mark. Now you can add the @ symbol if you guys want it as well. I decided to leave that one out as in some keyboards, sometimes the @ symbol could be a little tricky. And then what we want to do is we want to create a variable called charSet, which is going to be equal to all the sets combined. So we have the uppercase plus lowercase set plus numeric set plus the special set. And then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a variable called password plain text first. And that's going to be equal to a -join, open parentheses, get random. And then the count that we're going to be getting the random on is going to be the password policy dot minimum password length. So what this does is this will instantly get a random number now for the length of password policy, and then the default, I believe, is 1 through 10. So you're going to see a bunch of different numbers here. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to put the input object as the character set. Now, what this is going to do, this is going to take our character set and choose a random number of those characters to make a password. So as you can see, our password is TIDFQ ampersand 0 lowercase o 9 AM uppercase E. Now, what you could easily do is you can easily remove the O's or the zeros if you don't want the confusion for the user. I would totally understand that as well. And then what we want to do is we want to create our password variable, which is going to be equal to our password plain text. And we're going to want to pipe that to a convert to secure string as plain text. And we want to force that. And then all we need to do now is set AD password. Identity is going to be the username. The new password is going to be password, not the password plain text, because it needs to be a secure string for it to work. And then we want to do a reset here. And then all I really like to do, now this could be completely up to you in your environment. What I like to do is I like to do a set AD user identity username. Change password at logon is going to be set to true. Now, what we should be adding in here, which I don't have, is our server here. We always want to make sure to add that in case you have multiple domains here. So we got our set AD user and our set AD account password. And then all I like to do is create our result object as always. And we're going to make that equal to, you should probably guessed it by now, a PS custom object. And instead of name, we want username. And we also want new password as the other value here. And then the new password, we're going to put that as password plain text. The username, we're just going to pass in username here. And then all we really want to do is do a return result here. So let's go ahead and let's copy paste this code here into our PowerShell Universal. Let's go ahead and let's edit the details here. And let's copy paste all of this stuff in here and hit save. And let's go ahead and let's enter in our username, which is going to be test employee 3. And let's hit run. There it is. There's our new password, which is PLCOG capital NFRHQB. We can run it again and again and again. We just keep getting these new passwords. So it works very, very well. You never really have to worry too much. Now you will get the odd error at times, because of we haven't quite put in place yet that it requires the special set. That is up to you if you want to put that in there. All I literally do is I just hit run again and it creates a good password. So you can definitely add some extra intelligence in there to make sure that there is a special set. The chances of it not containing one, from what I've gathered, is fairly low. It really depends on what type of password policies you have in place. Most of the times, I've never really encountered too many issues. So all we want to do is hit save now, and let's go back. So we have 3 of our 6 routes here. The other 6 routes are actually fairly short, so let's go ahead and let's tackle them. And the nice thing about these next 3 API routes that I actually just realized is that they're all fairly similar, so they shouldn't take us that long actually. So let's go ahead and let's just go back into our Visual Studio Code. And let's look for the unlock account. So all this one actually is it's fairly simple. It's just going to actually be unlock-AD account. Identity is going to be username. Server is going to be jacked.ca. And we want to put the confirm as false because we won't have the ability to confirm it through this API endpoint. And then all we want to do to get, again, to pass back to the user to make sure that we've unlocked it is we're just going to do a get AD user. Identity is going to be username. Properties locked out because all we really want is just that. And then our server is going to be jacked.ca. And let's go ahead and let's create our result object here. And it's going to be a PS custom object. And we're going to have username is equal to $username. And we're going to have locked out is going to be equal to user dot locked out. All right. And we are just going to return the results here. And we can actually go ahead and test this out as well. So let's go ahead and let's just put this into our Powershell Universal. So let's create our endpoint. And we're going to name this unlock account / username. And once again, the method that we're going to use is we're going to put in as patch here. And we're going to click OK. And let's go ahead and let's edit the properties, remove the authentication, put it as 7.4.1. Just make sure, yeah, okay, there you go. And let's go ahead and let's edit here. And let's copy paste our code. And let's hit save. Now, our user isn't actually locked out currently. Because if we go and test employee 3, we can tell that it's not locked out at all. We can tell that we've reset the password because we have the user must change password at next logon. And it's not locked. So let's go ahead and let's trigger the account to actually lock out here. So let's open up Notepad as a different user here. And let's launch it as test employee 3. A few times here. All right, so we have the referenced account is currently locked out and may not be logged into. So everything there seems to be working great. And let's go ahead and let's put in our test employee 3 and let's hit run. We have our username. Locked out is now false. So now if we actually go into Active Directory, we could also just go into one of our other routes here. But we can see that the account is not locked out. And we can actually just do one more test just so you guys can actually physically see the account locked out on Active Directory. Let's go test employee 3. Test employee 3. Test employee 3. All right, so it says it's locked out. Let's go ahead, open up test employee 3. We see unlock account. This account is currently locked out on this Active Directory controller. If we hit run, we reopen the user here. Let's close. Let's reopen the user here. We can see that the account is no longer locked out. So our route is working correctly here. So let's go ahead and let's hit save and let's go back. So we already have 4 of our routes. The only 2 routes that are missing are going to be the enable and disable routes, which are practically the same route, just one little difference in a variable here. So let's go ahead and let's write the code We're just going to write the code for one, and then we're just going to paste it into the two other routes, just changing the information that we need. So to enable/disable an account, what we need to do is set AD user with the identity of username here. And we want to set the enabled is, so to disable the account, what we want to do is set enabled to false. We want the server to be jacked.ca. And once again, we do not want to have to confirm it. So we want to always put the confirm as false. And then all I really want to do, and I can actually just copy paste this from the unlock user account, is let's get the property called enabled here. And instead of sending back the locked out, is we send out the enabled property here. And that is really it for disabling the user. So let's go ahead and let's copy that code. Let's go back into our Powershell Universal, create our new endpoint, and let's call this disable account /:username. Once again, we're going to put that as patch here. Click OK. Disable the account. Let's remove the authentication, put the environment, and let's go ahead and let's edit the details, paste that script in here. Everything there looks great. And let's go ahead and let's disable the test employee free, because we know before we actually run it, we can actually see that the account is active. If we hit run, we did not get anything back here. Return results. And let's just refresh. And it is not set here. So let's go ahead and let's just run this code in Visual Studio. And that worked perfectly fine. So let's go ahead, let's re-enable the account here, because we're not getting an error has occurred. Oh, so something you always have to do that I just forgot is also, which is a very good tip, always you need to hit save on the editor before your code is actually gonna work in PowerShell Universal. So there we are. So it's getting an error. So let's see. So let's just actually exit out here. Let's go back into the code. Let's go test employee 3. Run that. There you go. It's working. It's enabled as false. So we can go ahead and just refresh. So we see our user is disabled. So if we go ahead and just re-enable it real quick, hit run once again, it ran. If we hit refresh once again, we see that our user is disabled. So our API endpoint is actually working correctly here. So then all we really need to do is actually copy the code from our disable and create our new endpoint and call it enable account /:username. Change our method to patch here and click on OK. And let's go ahead and let's just make sure that we remove the authentication, put it to 7.4.1, edit the code, paste it in here. Now, the only thing that we want to change is the enabled. Instead of being set to false, we're going to change that to true. Hit save. And now let's go ahead and let's go into our Active Directory once again. And I think it's actually still disabled because I haven't re-enabled it, which is perfect. And we saved our code. So let's put in our test employee 3 and let's hit run. And there it goes. It says enabled is true now. So let's go ahead and let's refresh. and we see that it is enabled. So we have all of our 6 API routes created. So already, when you already have all of these, you are fully able to actually go ahead, create a module with commandlets that use these API endpoints. You can create your own custom HTML, CSS, and JavaScript application. You can create your own C# application. You can use any programming languages that lets you interact with APIs and use these APIs to be able to manipulate your Active Directory users, which is fantastic because some programming languages make it very hard to work with Active Directory users. But in this case, we're using PowerShell as our backend, exposing our API to where any programming languages can really interact with it. And we're going to be using this in the next couple of videos when we're building out our project for our help desk, using these APIs in the user interfaces section of PowerShell Universal to make it a lot simpler for us. So now you have all the API routes created. We've created a bunch of different API routes, bunch of different functions. Go ahead, run those. If you haven't checked out this series on PowerShell Universal, I highly recommend you check that out because it's going to give you a good base, especially on creating the GUI, but also seeing a bit more of the API endpoints, seeing how to add authentication to the endpoints if you wanted to add authentication to them as well, but also give you a way how to run them in Visual Studio Code as well, just to test it out, just see how it actually works directly from code, and be able to just see kind of what we're about to do because it has a lot of examples that we're going to be using. If you want to add anything to this project, please comment down below. I'll try to add the features that you guys want us to add into this, or if you guys have another project idea that we can make with PowerShell Universal, maybe you yourself have created a tool in PowerShell Universal and would like to share the idea out and maybe see what we create for that same tool, that could be easily something that we can do as well. Please be sure to also hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, also hit that notification bell to be notified when that next video comes out, because that next video will be the next part in this project series. And I will see you guys on the next video.